How does the Incommensuration Theorem, ICT, and the metaphysics show up in everyday life?
How does it show up in everyday life? Well, how does choice, change, and causation show up in everyday life? I mean, these things are so intrinsic to the very nature of perception and of being and reality itself that to some extent it's showing up in every millisecond of every moment of every day. But I can give you some ideas. I can basically say, to the extent that it seems that the first person perspective and the third person perspective are in some way irreconcilable, i.e., the hard problem of consciousness, or, oh, by the way, yet that is yet another manifestation, right? Real easy to go from the third person, from the first person to the third person. But again, there's a symmetry breaking. How the heck do you get from the third person back to the first person? Theory is not enough to explain firsthand experience. Where does the symmetry breaking that is the thing that makes this universe unique to itself, where does that happen? And of course, you can apply the anthropological argument all you want, but it's not satisfying. Where does it actually land? That the specificness happens. Well, somehow we got to get back from the third person to the first person, but it's certainly not going to happen through any direct course because guess what? Axiom 2. The only way to get from the third person back to the first person is via the second person. Isn't that interesting? We don't make sense of things by ourselves. So how does this show up in a first person sense? Well, Habermas pointed to this. Reason emerges in the conversation. It emerges in the dynamic of communication. Communication is the superpower that moves us from just a social species or from just individuals into social species, but the fact of the nature of our communication moves us beyond the ants or the bees. Communication's able to be recursively constructed. There's been some real research into this that talks about the nature of language as recursively enumerable. And some of the deepest thinkers in the world that are thinking about language design have come to notice this. So in a sense, what is a way in which we experience axiom 2 in the first person sense? Well, we figure shit out by collaborating with one another. That's the second person transcendence beyond the third person identity to arrive at a first person choice, either as an individual or as a community. And so, in that sense, to the degree that we are experiencing change and causation and expressing in choices, we are embodying both the axioms and the incommensuration theorem and cannot not do that. The very fact that we experience identity in the sense of a continuity of consciousness. Who are you if you can't remember anything? Let's go back to Descartes for a moment. I think, therefore I am. In one series of essays, I pointed out that, well, actually, that's really interesting. It's basically asserting that a process, thinking, results in an identity. I am a being. Process as being. That's what I think, therefore I am, is actually asserting. That all being is based upon process. And he did it using this methodology of anything that I can doubt, we're cast it out. We're going to leave it as just, if there's any way, even in potential, that I could doubt it, then I'm going to assume that it's not true. I'm just going to do the things that I can't doubt. And it turns out that doubt as a process has some intrinsics. Are you going to be able to have a concept of doubt without a notion of truth or false? Probably not. So it turns out that anything that's intrinsic to the nature of doubt can't be doubted, because if I try to doubt it, I'm instantiating the intrinsics of doubt, and therefore the intrinsics of doubt cannot be doubted because they're carried along with the process itself. Any action to attempt to get away from them creates them. So you can't get away. So therefore, Descartes somehow managed to, I think, overlook this, but the idea is that the intrinsics of doubt are therefore also knowable as truths. But it turns out that's not all, right? There's a couple of other things that were missed. For example, I think, therefore I am. Well, what if you can't remember anything? You do the thinking, but you forget that you're thinking before you notice the I amness. So now all of a sudden the notion of continuity is built in. There has to be a connection between thinking and being. The becomingness is therefore also part of the picture. Becomingness as that which is not yet to that which is. You asked about creation earlier. Here's an example. I think, therefore I am is a moment of creation. It creates the very sense of I have identity, I have memory, I am. I know who I am. I know I am a thinking thing. And so in this sense, there are some intrinsics with it. What else is the case? Well, the notion of thinking is a process, it's a choice, it's a kind of expression. Say I couldn't think, I didn't have the choice to think. Without the expressive part of it, thinking as a action, I don't have the perceptive part of it, noticing of being. So in a sense, the expressive part and the perceptive part co-occur. Interaction can't be conceived of without both perception and expression as subclasses of the general concept of interaction. And you'll notice this is in the book also, right? So in effect, what you're observing here is that even in the most rudimentary sense of the most basic perception or the most basic expression, that there cannot not be this relationship between doing, being, and becoming. And that all of them tie in together. They're distinct and separable, non-interchangeable. The axioms are reemerging again. Can I know everything there is to know about doing, being, and becoming? Well, no, I don't know everything there is to know about creation. To some extent, creation is neither observable nor repeatable. There is an inherent unknowingness to creation, a newness that is ever present, an unpredictableness. So in that sense, the Descartes observation is an experience of not only the axioms and the modalities, but the incommensuration theorem itself. It is a reification of the relationship between the objective and the subject. I don't know that this helps. Like I said, we're talking at such a level of fundamentalness that to even use the concepts of perception and expression is tricky because we tend to think of them from our own lived experience of these things, but we're talking about them at such a rudimentary level that it's not just your experience, it's the experience of any alien in any universe. Any notion of consciousness itself is going to be an embodiment of these truths. So our notion of perception and expression is way the heck too anthropomorphic for the needs of this actuality.